Next on the program is Dr. Jeff Shuren, a name that is so familiar to us as the director of the FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or CDRH. We're thrilled to have Dr. Shuren with us today to hold a very conversational town hall via live stream video. Dr. Shuren seems to have become a fixture of our annual summits, and we couldn't be more pleased about that. For more than a decade, Dr. Shuren has led CDRH, working with industry to foster innovation, bring safe and effective technologies to patients. He is a neurologist and an attorney who, prior to assuming the director role, worked on policy in the FDA Commissioner's office. He's a valued partner for our industry and our state. Let's give a big Utah welcome to Dr. Jeff Shuren.
Well, thank you, Kelvin. Good morning, everyone. A real pleasure to be able to participate in this event again. And one day, I keep promising Kelvin, I will show up in person when I can get out the door. Typically when I talk about the center, I will start with kind of high level what's going on as center as a whole. But I thought this time I'd start with MDUFA, because I know implementation of the fifth MDUFA installment has been top of mind for folks. And I thought I'd really cut to the chase. Here's the story. We are meeting or on track to meet all of our 2023 performance goals. And that's really great news, particularly coming out of the pandemic when we hit so many challenges. And quite frankly, in the pandemic, we had a tsunami of extra work that came in the door and made it very challenging to sort of meet the MDUFA 4 commitments. And everyone was adversely impacted by the pandemic. And still, even though a lot of the pandemic work is done, other pre-market work is actually high. In fact, is picking up. It's even higher than in the past. So here's kind of the numbers, just to give you an idea. Our MDUFA workload for pre-market review has actually been steadily increasing over the past several years, and 2023 is our busiest year so far. And this excludes any kind of pandemic work, those submissions, and that's not MDUFA. So those numbers going up, and one of the big drivers is pre-market submissions. And that's good in the sense that folks are seeking feedback from us. And we got additional dollars in MDUFA to kind of take care of it, but it kind of shows you those numbers going up. We're also seeing some of the highest numbers for other types of submissions like de novos. We're having an absolute banner year. So overall, the workload goes up, but we are meeting our goals. And I think that's really great signs for the program. And if folks had heard me before, I'd said 2023 was going to be a transition year. We're coming out of the pandemic. This program is going to be back on track. We're going to meet our goals and then some. And that's the way things are turning out. I'm really excited about that. Just to highlight a few other things by way of accomplishments, one thing is improving submission review performance. Just in the past year, a few things out was updates on a variety of guidance. One to highlight is on deficiency letters. We know how important it is that if we identify a deficiency, we explain our rationale. So we updated policy, we trained our folks, and now we're going back and we're auditing that performance. That's actually looking good that we picked up our ability on providing those rationales. We've also invested a lot in moving towards more and more electronic submissions and making it easier, for companies not only do that, but to track where that submission is in the process. And that's through a portal we had launched the other year, a customer collaboration portal. And we're putting out templates for different submission types that try to walk folks through what information we need and how to package that to better assure that the information we need, it's in there from the get-go, and in a format that makes our review more efficient. That's eStar, and already all 510Ks coming in the door have to be using that template. We've had a whole bunch of program and process improvements. I'm going to talk about the TAP pilot and digital health in just a minute, but a lot of other things going on with updated guidance in patient science, in real-world evidence, and more to come on real-world evidence. Put out a draft strategic plan for our efforts on international harmonization and continue to beef up our third-party review program. And of course, we got to be held accountable for meeting our performance. So we are always reporting out on how we're doing on meeting our performance goals. And we've also put together our protocol for collecting data now in MDUFA 5. And there's a whole bunch of additional data that'll be coming out in this round of MDUFA. And then, of course, finally, we have to be held responsible that we're, spending our dollars appropriately and wisely. And so we put out that information and also baked in our hiring goals that are tied to funding. This is kind of a first time that this has occurred. We at CDRH were supposed to bring on board 141 additional folks in 2023, and we've met that goal. And we're really excited about that. It's a great boost in the arm for the program. The TAP pilot. TAP, from my standpoint, it's one of the most exciting things that we have launched in the medical device program. This isn't simply about how we are expediting pre-market review. It's really about how you make the valley of death, going from concept to commercialization, more predictable and more efficient. And we had committed that we would launch in one sort of product area, and that was cardiovascular devices. We already have 15 products in the door under this pilot. We just opened up the doors in the beginning of October for neurovascular and physical medicine devices, and already we got a number on the launching pad to join into the pilot. We've got a bunch of metrics already. We're hitting those targets. And we are having just very frequent interactions with these developers. We're bringing in outside stakeholder groups where they're interested, like the patient groups, provider groups who have now signed up, and they are all a part of this pilot program. And we're already have work underway to try to bring the payers in the door too. Again, if a participating company is interested in having that kind of interaction. So again, really good news on the TAP pilot so far, and the feedback from participating companies has been exceptionally positive. And of course, on digital health, one of the big focus areas is on technology that is artificial intelligence, machine learning enabled. I just put this slide up here just to show you there's been so much work done in this space, of which the MDUFA commitments are just, if you will, a tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot going on. One of the things we had committed to do is to put out a draft guidance on what's called a predetermined change control protocol or plan, where the company sort of lays out, here are the changes that we want to make, and here's how we would go ahead and validate those changes. And if that plan looks good, and we'll work with the company on it, then we'll bless the plan and the company can move forward and make those changes as long as they follow the plan and they don't have to come back to the FDA for pre-market review. That draft guidance out the door. We're going to finalize it this year in 2020, fiscal year 2024. That is certainly our goal. But also, if you're interested in this approach, this is available for all other kinds of technologies. And it is something, if you want to do, take a look at what we laid out for AI ML. Obviously, it's a little bit targeted, but it gives you a flavor of the kinds of things we may be thinking about, and then talk with your review team about it. But those doors are open, and you don't have to wait for guidance to be able to take advantage of it, even though we are working on guidance for its use in other areas. I also want to mention some of the other actions in the AI space. We recently announced the creation of a new digital health advisory committee. This goes beyond AI to a variety of aspects in digital health. And it's focused on more cross-cutting scientific and technical issues. Product-specific issues are going to be dealt with in the applicable, advisory committee. But this is for the more cross-cutting issues. We are taking nominations for committee members until December 11th. So if you're interested, please take a look at the notice that we issued on this topic. And if you have good candidates, please submit those in by the deadline. We also want to ensure that we and our sister centers for drugs and biologics are in lockstep. We already have a group that we have set up to try to assure that, but we're also working on an action plan for those areas where we have commonalities, again, to assure that we are coming out with consistent policy and consistent approaches. We also recently announced harmonized guiding principles with the UK and with Canada around predetermined change control plans for AI ML. So a lot is happening in this space and a lot more to come. Now let me turn to kind of things at the center level. Now, one of the things we look at is how well we're doing in terms of novel technologies coming to the marketplace. I think folks know we have been following our North Star, a vision that patients in the US have access to high quality, safe and effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world. Again, first in the world, not being out trying to compete or beat other countries, but just a great metric of timely patient access. So we, for years, have been looking at one of the things being how many novel technologies do we authorize for the US market in any given calendar year? And you can see now that those numbers have been consistently threefold increase from where we were when we first started looking at this and when I first came to the center in late 2009. One of the exciting points, though, is not only has this trajectory been good, but if you take a look at 2020, you see this 132. Well, a big driver here, about 30 plus of those authorizations were for COVID devices, under an EUA. So if you take that out of the mix, and now you look at 2023, we're actually on track that we might have either our best or second best year for novel device authorizations, because this is in the absence of the COVID technologies, by comparison, doing unbelievably well. And that's just a testament also to seeing great technology coming to the US. And I can tell you the pipeline looks really good at this point. Another healthy sign is our Breakthrough Devices program. We are now consistently seeing probably over 130 devices authorized as breakthrough every given year. 2023, this calendar year, so this data is still not yet final, and we're anticipating we'll certainly make it over the 130 mark, and that's probably going to be the baseline, and that's an incredibly healthy number. That's a lot. The other great news is we are now authorizing these technologies. So it's already 85 as of the beginning of November. And recall, you get the designation early in development, so it's take a few years before you're ready for review. But this is great and a really healthy mix of PMAs, de novos, and 510Ks. So those are also really good signs. Now, something that we had measured previously was the intent of developers of novel technologies for the US marketplace. Do they actually intend to come to the US first or in parallel with other major markets, right? We're not here to beat the other countries, but if the idea is we want to get them out close in time, but we're in the pack for, that first tranche, that's great news. And so when we were making changes in the program and we set that North Star, the first thing is, can we change hearts and minds? Because we knew the technology wasn't coming here first in most cases, at least in the past. And you can see we set a goal of having at least 50%, and we've been consistently exceeding that for the past few years, and we're trying to push this number up a lot further. But in our most recent strategic priorities, we decided to kind of put our nickel down and say, we think we're really at the point where we can see our vision being achieved. And so we set a goal for ourselves that by the end of calendar year 2025, more than 50% of manufacturers of newly authorized novel technologies for the US market, in fact, brought their device to the US first, or in parallel with other major markets. And we have now been collecting that data, and this is where we are. We are over that 50% mark. And now we're looking at feedback from companies in terms of, we're always asking, why didn't you come here first? And what would it take for you to come here first? And we're starting to look at additional changes to make in the program to continue to make the US a more attractive marketplace. So I will tell you too, if you all have ideas, both feedback for us about, what it would take to make the U.S. more attractive, or the things that maybe are going on to make it less attractive, our doors are open. The phone lines are open. We'd love to get that feedback as well as suggestions on how we can improve the program and continue to push up that trajectory. So with that, I'm going to stop here, and I'll turn it back to you, Kelvin, kind of open the door for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shuren. Let's give him a round of applause for that great presentation. We appreciate having Dr. Shuren here virtually, and like you said, we hope to get him here in person in the future. What we are going to do with this town hall meeting is we're going to invite anyone who would like to ask a question. We have microphones in the aisles, and don't be shy. We have an opportunity. I've worked with Dr. Shuren a lot. He is open to any question. He will tackle anything. He can't address your specific company issues, but he can address anything else along those lines. So while you're thinking about what questions you would like to ask, let me start off with a couple of questions that I'll pose, and then we'll turn it over to the audience so that you can ask questions as well. So Jeff, one of the issues, we talked about this last year a little bit as well, but it continues to be a pressing issue for the medical device community, and that has to do with ethylene oxide sterilization and this conflict that seems to be in place between EPA and FDA. So for those who are not aware, ethylene oxide is the type of sterilization that is used on the majority of medical devices to make them safe for patient use. EPA has some concerns about the utilization of that gas in the sterilization process, and there's some concern about their efforts hampering the ability to provide products to patients. And so we just thought we'd ask you for an update on where things are at from your perspective and what FDA's position is in working with EPA and whether there's anything specific going on there.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate that question because I know what's going on with ethylene oxide is top of mind for so many companies. And I'll just first say, look, it's EPA's job to sort of, determine are there, various materials that can put, people or the environment at risk. And we're there as a partner, though, to best assist them to minimize the likelihood of adverse impact on medical devices. And that's really the role that we have taken. And we have been working very closely with the EPA, as well as with the White House, Department of Health and Human Services, and others to try to ensure they've got the best information, they understand the approaches they take, what the impact may be on medical device availability, and what may be actions to kind of assure they can best meet their objectives, but not, put patients at risk with device shortages. So in the case of ethylene, and specifically with ethylene oxide too, we've taken a number of steps. One is to help sterilizers reduce the amount of ethylene oxide that they use for sterilization. And we've had, a master file open working with sterilizers who are interested on reducing that footprint so then they're overall using less. Secondly, we've been looking at an assessment of impact on the marketplace of the EPA proposed rule, and we have provided all of that feedback to EPA and others in government, as well as suggestions on considerations of what they might do in light of what the potential impacts may be. We have also been working with sterilizers on alternative methods of sterilization rather than ETO. So, kind of either now or in the future, looking to kind of move off of it and be a little less dependent on ETO, or expanding existing means of sterilization and facilitating that. So we have been also putting up for a master file on radiation, because in some cases there are technologies that could be sterilized with radiation in lieu of ethylene oxide. But the bottom line at the end of the day, for all those efforts, ethylene oxide is still likely going to be a very commonly used sterilization method because it's so good at sterilizing and not compromising the integrity of the medical device. So more to come. We'll see where things end up with the EPA final rule. And ultimately, we hope that the outcome is that what EPA puts in place will not lead to device shortages at the end of the day. And we'll be continuing to work on this effort until the very last moment. I can tell you there are literally several weekly meetings just on this topic alone.
Well, we assume that would be the case. On your confidence level that everything's going to be okay, where do you fall?
Oh, I don't make those predictions. This one is out of my control because I know it's going to happen. There's going to be Vegas odds, and no, we're not getting into that. Stick with football.
Okay. If you're a University of Utah fan, football's a good thing here. If you're BYU, not so much. So, I'm just looking if there's anyone at the microphones yet. If not, I'll ask another question. You talked about innovation and how important that is, and we have a lot of companies here in Utah who actually have breakthrough device designations, which is really exciting. And in fact, one of our companies today just announced a unique approval on a de novo application, a company called Outlet, and we're really excited for them. So we're seeing the things you're talking about starting to happen. But part of the breakthrough device designation has to do also with reimbursement, and you've got an issue with the TSET program that Medicare has tried to do. Is FDA doing anything? Are there similar meetings with CMS relative to TSET like there is with EPA on the ETO issue?
Well, we were certainly very much engaged with CMS when it was MCET. And in fact, the original concept of MCET was something that came from us over to CMS. And we were actively involved with that. TSET is something that CMS did a lot more on their own. We were not actively engaged on TSET. And, the two, they're targeted to address different issues. MCET was really provide predictability early and try to make the environment for investment in innovation a lot healthier in the US. TSET, from what we see, is about maybe some more predictability at the end of the line, for a handful of companies. And it's going to be for those folks who are then truly looking for national coverage is the route that we want to go. So it's just a very different calculus. And certainly not where we, at the agency saw the biggest need, but Medicare, for a number of reasons, felt that where they went was the better target.
Well, that's interesting. For those who don't know the acronyms, TSET is Transitional Coverage for Emerging Technologies. So it's trying to get reimbursement in advance or know that reimbursement can be had for an emerging technology. The TSET program that was approved was helpful, but only covers a few devices perhaps a year. So we'd love to see that expanded. We prefer the MCET program that FDA was advocating, so continue to work on that. All right, we've got someone at the microphone. If you'll say your name, please, and ask your question.
Hi, Eric Henry from King & Spalding. Earlier in the year, in several forums, you have set a target for the QMSR final rule for December of this year, at least to get it into the hands of OIRA. I'm wondering if that goal is still realistic, and if you could just give us a general update on the final rule.
Yeah, so the most I can tell you is, and the Washington two-step, I'm not allowed to say too much because it's also out of our control, but that one is moving forward. I don't know if it'll quite make December at this point, but it's out of, let me put it this way, it's out of my hands at this point.
And for those who don't know, what is the QMRS? Jeff, go ahead.
So this is, no,
Jeff, go ahead. Yeah.
For me. So for folks who, every time you're looking, by the way, when you kind of look to me, you're looking to the side. So I'm looking at your profile.
Okay, I'll look at you.
You're pointing to, say, hey, you're over here. I'm over here.
Yeah.
Talk to me over here. So the rule that we're talking about is we're essentially we are harmonizing with the ISO 13485 standard that's out there, really with the goal, to try to then allow companies to follow one standard across many countries. And, little add-on here for us, and you'll have an add-on for other countries, but truly make this much more efficient for companies. And if will facilitate the ability for countries to rely on inspections or audits that are conducted by other trusted countries as well.
Great. Thank you. All right, another question from the audience.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. My name is Dan Peterson. I work for Network Partners. My question is, and you touched a little bit on this with regards to the eStar program and the digital efforts that we're making to kind of streamline the process. And so the question is, that kind of became mandatory, I believe, October, November, so right about this time. But it's been live for a little while. Have we seen an improvement on the turnaround times for device clearances based on the utilization of that eStar program?
Yeah, it's a great question. We certainly I don't have hard data. Our own perspective is this has been helpful. Eventually we'll get to that. At the same time, overall reviews are a lot better, but this aspect of it, folks do find that we have higher confidence in the general quality of the submission, more from the standpoint of it being complete. And it's easier for us to find the information that's in there. But anticipate that eStar over time, we're going to look to make the templates even more, I'll say, rational, in the sense of better facilitating, walking folks through what to provide, assuring things are connected in a very logical fashion, which I think will continue to pay off dividends at the end of the day in terms of the quality of the submission. Because the higher the quality of the submission, the clearer things are, and the less that we have to connect the dots, the greater likelihood that review is going to be very efficient at the end of the day. So early signs good, but I don't have a hard quantitative objective, very good objective measure.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And I do want to acknowledge those forms, for anyone that's used them, are wildly complicated. And so thank you so much for your team's effort in creating those templates. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know how to take that. It's sort of, they're wildly complicated. Thank you. I can't take that back to my folks and said, I was just told things are complicated. They're very happy.
Yeah. Yeah. We have another question at the audience. Go ahead.
Hi, Lars Moritzen with Abendium. Jeff, thank you for taking time to be with us today. This is really helpful. I wondered if you could comment about the proposed rule on LDTs, and assuming that goes forward as it's been proposed, what the how tests that are currently online, how long that sort of burn-in phase would take, and how the FDA is going to be able to respond to that. I mean, from a kind of a manpower standpoint, because there's a lot of tests that will have to get approved.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question, because I know there's a lot of eyes and attention on the LDT rule. As proposed, it would cover tests currently on the market. And then there's essentially, a 4-year phase-in period. Each year, different requirements coming into play. At 3.5 years out is when you have to have a submission in the door for high risk. 4 years out, submission in the door for moderate risk. That said, we posed a very explicit question. While everything in the rule is open for comment, we wanted to specifically target certain issues, one of them being, should we continue our policy of not actively enforcing requirements, either in whole or in part, for some or all tests currently out on the marketplace? So that's something we're going to be looking at public comment, and it is possible, we'll see, that the rule will look different regarding tests on the marketplace in some respects. in the final. I don't know at this point. We'll see public comments and where that goes. So I think getting to the resource issue is a great question, a little premature because the policy may not in the final may be different than what's in the proposed. Secondly, though, if there is pre-market review for any of these tests, we have said in the rule, and that's likely to continue in a final rule, that as long as you have the submission in the door, you don't come off the market. So even if there's additional time taken in the review, the product, the test, still remains available at the end of the day.
Jeff, can I just follow up on that question? For those who don't know, LDT stands for
Depends on your
laboratory.
follow-up question.
Laboratory developed tests is what LDT stands for. These are tests that are done by labs, for instance, that aren't necessarily subject to FDA approval, but they go through a CLIA approval. Tell us just a little bit about why for years this was not regulated, and now we're talking about regulating it. Can you just give us a perspective from FDA's perspective?
Well, certainly. So under the FDA law, FDA has oversight of tests, of in vitro diagnostics, and it does not distinguish who makes the test. There's nothing about the law that does that. For CLIA, even when the 1988 amendments came out, even CMS said, the administrator, this does not impact FDA oversight on devices. What FDA does and this does, they're different, but they're complementary. And when we were setting up the program in 1976 on devices, the LDTs were made small numbers. They were low risk generally. They were used in unique cases in hospitals, very small, patient populations. And in setting up the program, the agency decided it was a better use of resources to focus on other technologies because they were getting that program underway. But the world changed, and increasingly LDTs are higher risk. They're more sophisticated, a lot of them with software and automation. And we're also starting to see and being used for larger, population sets. And we're starting to see more issues arise with those tests. And the effort to start pulling back, changing that policy of not enforcing requirements, what we call enforcement discretion policy, that started in the 1990s, actually. And we had even calls on the outside from some advisory committees for the Secretary of HHS about changing that policy. We even started putting out a policy, we put out draft policy to pull this back for a subset of high-risk tests. That was back in 2006, 7, I think. And then we got feedback to say, well, don't do this piecemeal. If you're going to do anything, do it holistically. And we put out draft guidance in 2014 to do pretty much what we're doing today. It's nothing new. It's absolutely nothing new. But we got comment and some of it from congressional members who said, we'd like to work on a legislative solution with the goal being to change the framework for tests, put in a more modern framework. And we said, okay, we are willing to work with folks. And there was an effort, different instantiations. The latest was called VALID. And VALID was really, the main thing was about putting a different framework in place than what we currently have. That got close to the finishing line, but didn't quite get there. And we've kind of seen from our own experience, from more studies out there about problems with a number of LDTs that continue, as well as we've heard even from non-laboratory developers about the disincentives on innovation from having this bifurcated approach over tests. And the companion diagnostic space in oncology has completely collapsed as a result of that. Very hard to get non-laboratories into the mix for making those tests, even though the tests they make could be available across the country. Laboratory may be making it just for a smaller catchment area, and you don't have that available then, for other patients. So that's why we kind of move forward with the rulemaking. And we did rulemaking because, again, we got comment, don't do guidance, do rulemaking, please. So we're just kind of giving into, requests. But this has been going on for many years. I have personally been involved in this for now 18 years. Give you an idea. So it's not new. The issues aren't new, but it's kind of time to, let's resolve this. And for us too, we'll continue to work with stakeholders. If Congress ever decides they want to put, legislation back on the table, we'll be there as a partner. But the time has come. We need to just proceed, because we were proceeding on this in 2014, and we're just kind of picking up almost where we left off.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification and background. That's very helpful. All right, let's go to the audience mic over here.
Hi, Carly Plenert, BioMaryU. Back to review timelines. Could you comment a little bit on the transition plan for EUAs, and maybe the timeline for the closure of the COVID EUA, and also maybe when we will see the review timelines for 510Ks and de novos for diagnostics to return to normal?
Yeah, no, very good question. So I'm going to again do the Washington thing by saying something but not answering your question, because you'd love to know, when are we going to say you need to start sending EUA, full market authorization submissions in the door. There isn't a set time frame now, and here's why. We have folks coming in the door with those submissions. We want to make sure there's enough product on the marketplace that has full marketing authorization before we yank away the EUAs. We don't want to disrupt the availability of product. So when it comes to tests, you're starting to see more and more of those tests getting full marketing authorization. So the point is going to come where we're going to say, in X amount of time, and typically in 6 months, you need to be in the door, or the EUA is going to go away, and that's it. But we do not have that time for you, because we're really looking to see what's happening on the market, and a good part of that isn't up to us. It's when the developers are coming in the door, and then ultimately we get to yes on the authorization. So that's kind of the story with EUAs. What about IVDs and the timeframes? So the part of the agency that was hit the hardest, obviously, was in vitro diagnostics. I mean, the workload just got hammered with that. And a lot of it just had to do with how the US was situated around tests, in the absence of really any game plan for the country. We were kind of stuck with having to authorize anything coming through. That is not a smart way, to do things. You would never do this. And we've put that out in different recommendations of what the country should do differently. And that's now worked its way into administration plans for the future. So where are we with current reviews? They've kind of moved through most of their backlog. That's almost closed out from what was sitting there before. So we had said 2023, we're going to try to clear things out the door and then kind of pick up that pace again as we're now looking at the MEDUFA 5 subset. And so far, that is doing a lot better in vitro diagnostics. So we're on that trajectory to really be back on course. And it's kind of my hope is we'll be in a fairly good place in 2024.
Thank you.
Chris?
Chris Phillips with Epitel. Thank you, Dr. Shuren. Appreciate your presence here.
Oh, it's Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
If you're at CDRH, you call me Dr. Shuren, you owe me $1.
I love it. I'll get you $1 the next time I see you then. With predetermined change control plans, I think they present a really exciting opportunity for industry, for everyone, for FDA as well, to advance product development, help make sure that we maintain that position in the U.S. as a leader. One of those shared challenges, though, that we face now, one that we've always had to some extent, is making sure as companies that we're maintaining a level of safety and effectiveness. And I think that we appreciate the additional ownership we have over that through these authorized PCCPs. I did want to ask one question about that. Given where we are with the PCCPs now, are there any, and the draft guidance, are there any set expectations? Is FDA working on any benchmarks, any targets, any thresholds, either for training or validation? so that we have a better idea of how to develop a PCCP that's likely for authorization, what is being done in terms of developing toward the final guidance there. And as a secondary question to that, I'm in the AI ML space, but I know there are plenty here who are not. Are there examples of other devices that have been able to leverage the PCCP thus far, or is that a target initiative for the future?
Yeah, no, a good question. So we have taken the PCCP approach in the past with some in vitro diagnostics. So I'm trying to think. I think Foundation Medicine Foundation One has that kind of approach. I know Memorial Sloan Kettering, too, with one of their genomic tests also has that approach, where then they're able to add on additional variants without having to come back to the FDA for review. For AI/ML, because that's a space where not only you're kind of saying, well, can I have a better idea of what I might have in there by way for verification, validation, and even thinking about mitigations that would give the confidence that you don't need to take a look at, these changes that are being made. And, beyond that, there's just a need for a lot more predictability in this space anyway, because I think, developers too are kind of struggling about what are the best advice rules of the road for trying to do responsible AI, and now the biggest focus being on machine learning for the moment. And this is something so beyond the FDA. Our sense has been you need community-based solutions. So we have been working with and pushing folks towards a public-private partnership called CHI, probably know of it, Coalition for Health Artificial Intelligence, because it's got representation in the developer, clinical, community. FDA is there. And the tasks, and this is what they're moving forward on currently, is to start putting together what are sort of, just basic standards on development, validation, training, tuning for AI, ML, best practices, and then tools as well, because folks are going to need that toolkit. For us, in addition, we're very interested in also kind of that, if you will, a set of mitigations that you might consider putting in place too, because at the end of the day, we know we're going to have a bit of a moving target. It's how we're kind of assuring we stay on that performance specs, stay on target, or if they're intended to get better, that we're certainly not getting worse, and we don't have those unintended consequences, that may occur. But that's something that we're looking as a community-based to put that out there, not something that's going to be completely, solely driven by the FDA, because that just doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Jeff.
So we have about 5 minutes left, Jeff. Let me just ask two quick questions. Harmonization. What's the progress on the harmonization situation with other countries? And then I have one last question. So if you can give me a 1-minute answer on harmonization, I've got one last question.
All right. So number of different work streams underway in the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. I'd say one space that's active and probably going to get more active is around digital health, and particularly around artificial intelligence, machine learning. One of the areas that I think, unfortunately, is going to be a little stagnant for a while is ever getting to a medical device single review program. U.S. law is the holdback, and right now, I'm not seeing signs. I don't think this is really going to get changed anytime soon, and that means we, as the U.S., we can't be a player, and folks are looking for us to take the lead to set up such a program. That's kind of unfortunate, particularly as we're going to be chair of IMDRF in 2024. Would have been a golden opportunity.
That kind of leads to my last question. FDA is working on statutory laws that were established back in the 70s and 80s. We're 50 years plus forward on that. What do you see, if you had a magic wand and could wave it, what would you like to see changed in the process that would bring us more current to deal with the kinds of technologies we're dealing with today rather than having to